Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to be going over my wrap up for the month of March. It was a pretty solid reading month. It was middle grade March, so I did read a fair amount of middle grade. I read 24 books overall. 7 of those were audiobooks. Only 11 were my unread shelf, and unread shelf really is a combination of physical TBR and my Libro TBR, and my Libro TBR is extensive to say the least. So while 11 might sound good, it's actually not that great. I read a lot of library books in March. And 13 of the books I read were by or had a main character who was a person of color, and then 10 of those books were written by or had a queer main character, or someone who is under the LGBTQ umbrella. I don't dive in on those two stats any deeper because it just feels a little icky to be trying to chase down either someone's nationality, someone's race, or someone's sexual identity. So I don't track those in depth, but I do like to keep track of how well I'm doing at prioritizing diversity in my reading life. So there are those stats. I asked you last month if you liked when I included my DNFs, and all the responses were yes, you want to hear about the DNFs. So I only DNF 2 books this month, which I think is what I did about last month. So maybe 2 DNFs tends to be my average. I DNF'd Bones to the Wind, which was such a bummer. This is a new adult fantasy. It's indie published. I really wanted to love it. I really liked the writing style. I thought the world was really creative. The reason I DNF'd it is because our main characters are 15. And it makes me feel icky to read about 15-year-olds having sex in a book that is marketed to 18 and older readers. So that's why I DNF'd it, because it was too big of an ick and I couldn't oversee it. I couldn't overlook it, and yeah, so that was just a no for me. I would read from this author again if the next time she has a book out, the characters are not 15-year-olds. And then the other book I DNF'd was The Doldrums. This is middle grade. I don't think I have my copy anymore. Yeah, I unhauled it already. And it didn't do anything wrong. Oh, no, wait, it did. Okay, well, I DNF'd it because it was boring, and the plot did not align with the expectations the synopsis had given me. And sometimes I can push back past that and it'll be fine. And then there are other times where the promise of the premise was so compelling that if I'm not getting what I feel like I was promised by the synopsis, then I'm not interested in the actual book that was written. And in this case, it was the latter situation. I also DNF'd this because it had fat-phobic language and fat-phobic descriptions of the villain, and the villain was the only fat character in the whole book, and I just, it was a real Roald Dahl type of energy in how he also uses fat-phobic language for his villains. So those are the reasons I DNF'd those 2 books. Moving on to what I did read. I'm going to organize these into 2 different groups. I'm going to do my middle grade March books first, and then do all the, did I read any YA this month? I read a little YA. So I'll include the YA with the adult books, but that way, and I'll put the timestamps down below, so that way if middle grade is not your thing and you're not interested, you can just skip ahead. And if you are interested in middle grade, then I'll do those books for you as well. All right, let's start with the series that I read. This was for the 2nd episode of Finish It, which I'm debating not continuing because it hasn't been doing very well. And those end up being kind of time consuming to film, probably because I'm reading a series for it. So I don't know. I might not keep going with that one. I don't know if the return is worth the output, if that makes sense. But I am really happy that I read this series because I had a really good time binge reading this series. But I read the Mississauga Saga by David A. Robertson, which is The Barren Grounds, The Great Bear, The Stone Child. Ooh, it's so shiny. And The Portal Keeper. And then book 5 comes out later this year. And this is a portal fantasy series. It gets compared to Narnia a lot. Narnia meets traditional indigenous stories of the sky and constellations. That's what it is. And I would say it's a pretty good comp for this. Our main characters are Morgan and Eli, and they are 2 First Nations preteens who are in the foster care system and are placed with this foster family and quickly discover a portal that leads from the attic of their foster home to Mississauga, which is a Cree-inspired fantasy world. I loved the arc through this whole series. They all follow right after each other. There's not really a time jump in between, so they're great to binge read because they definitely, I think The Barren Grounds you could kind of read as a standalone, but then once you get into The Great Bear and they all end on cliffhangers, and it's really nice to have the next book to just jump right in. And I like that David A. Robertson really kept these books from getting boring. He would add something into the next book to offset the rhythm a little bit, so it's not always Morgan and Eli sneaking through the portal to this other world to make sure and trying to make sure that their foster parents don't find out about it. And it's a little bit queer, which I always love, and the themes do get darker as you go along, but I think they're done in an age-appropriate way, and I think the things that Morgan and Eli are going through, the things they're worried about, the things they care about, are all very, very relatable. And I gave each of these books, I can't remember individually, but these all ranged from like a 4 to a 4.75 rating wise. So I had a great time reading the series, and I did listen to all of them on audio, and the same narrator does all of them, and the narrator is fantastic. So I also highly recommend these on audio. All right, and my disappointing read for middle grade March was The Case of the Left-Handed Lady by Nancy Springer. This is book 2 in the Enola Holmes mystery series, and I remember reading book 1 back when the movie with Millie Bobby Brown first came out, and I liked it. I had a really good time. Katherine Kellgren does an audiobook. Sorry if you can hear the train. She's one of my favorite audiobook narrators, or was. She passed away a few years ago, but she was one of my favorite audiobook narrators, and I love finding audiobooks of hers that I haven't listened to yet. But this was just boring, and it didn't do anything wrong. Like, there wasn't anything that offended me. There wasn't any language that I had issue with. I was just bored and I lost interest. So as much as I love Katherine Kellgren, I don't think I'll be continuing in this series, especially since obviously I finished this and then we watched the second movie because we hadn't watched it yet, and that one doesn't even follow the plot of the book anyway. So, and I don't think they're going to be making any more Enola Holmes movies, so I don't really have any reason to continue going on in the series since I've clearly lost interest. So I don't even remember what the plot was. Enola is the well, I was going to say fictionalized little sister of Sherlock Holmes, but since Sherlock Holmes is fictional, in the fan fiction of Sherlock Holmes retellings, in this particular one, Enola is Sherlock's much younger little sister, and she has, because of events in the first book, run away from her brothers, Sherlock and Mycroft, and is living alone in London, trying to stay under the radar so her brothers don't send her to finishing school and force her to be a young lady of quality. And she ends up solving murders, like her brother. So yeah, that's it. I also listened to Before the Ever After by Jacqueline Woodson. This is a novel in verse about a boy whose father is a professional football player and ends up being diagnosed with CTE. And it's from the boy's perspective of what it's like to have a parent who is changing, and how hard that is and what that looks like. And this is set in the early 2000s, so there's not a whole lot that's really known about CTE or how to treat those types of brain injuries. If you remember what the conversation was around football players with CTE at that time, there wasn't very much support or answers or any support system in place for those players and for their families. So this is excellent, so well done, but it is sad. Also listened to Witches of Brooklyn. This is a graphic novel, but who is this publisher? Random House Kids just released a full cast audiobook this month, I think. Well, March. And I had a copy from Libro FM, so I ended up listening to it. But this is the arc that we've had since 2020 when I was still a bookseller, and it's been one of my kids' favorites for a long time. So it was really nice to finally listen to it and see why they loved it so much. I had a girl named Effie who is sent to live with her aunt who lives in Brooklyn, and comes to find out that her aunts are witches and that Sophie is also a witch. And it was really fun, really cute. I had a great time reading it, and I think this is a series, so I think there are more books set in this almost our world. And then I only had one reread this month as far as middle grade goes. I have another reread in my adult section. I reread The Wild Robot by Peter Brown because I read this a few years ago and then never continued on with the series. And DreamWorks announced that they have a movie adaptation that's going to be coming out in September, and the trailer is gorgeous. And so I reread this one, so now I can continue on with the series. But this is about a robot named Roz who crash lands on this island that is only inhabited by animals, and she learns about being a living being from these animals. She adopts a baby goose, or a gosling. I know words. She adopts a gosling and raises it, and it's really sweet. It's so adorable. There are illustrations in here, and I'm just so excited for the movie, and I'm all prepared to just bawl my eyes out because I do get teary-eyed at the end of this book, so I can only imagine how DreamWorks is going to emotionally devastate me. I highly recommend this if you like a cozy, wholesome, sweet, slightly emotional middle grade time. The rest of these middle grade books are books that where I made progress in a series, which is very exciting. I did read the most recent Myrtle Hardcastle book. This is Myrtle Means and Opportunities, and in this one, Myrtle and her governess, Miss Judson, go to Scotland because Miss Judson gets a notice that she inherited a Scottish estate from a long lost relative. And so they go up so Miss Judson can claim her inheritance, but things are not as they seem, and they come to find that Miss Judson's relative may have died under nefarious circumstances. And so they go about to solve the mystery. I did not love this one. Not my favorite Myrtle Hardcastle. I didn't like the setting very much. I know usually Scotland is like a popular setting, but I felt like this one was too isolated. But then conversely enough, it felt like there were too many new characters to follow, where it got a little confusing to keep track of who is who. I also think Elizabeth C. Bunce, in an effort to write the Scottish dialect, wrote the words as they would be phonetically pronounced, which made the reading, it was fine if I was listening to the audiobook because obviously the narrator is just going to read them as they are supposed to be pronounced, but reading it with your eyeballs required some deduction and made the reading experience a little bit more frustrating. And I could definitely see with a younger reader, a 10-year-old, an 11-year-old, if they're not a super strong reader, that could be a really frustrating experience. I think even with a strong, 11-year-old reader, I think it could still be frustrating because you do have to think through what the word could be, because it didn't always make sense how they were spelled out. So I felt like she was trying to be clever and it didn't work. And then the ending of this, I'm not sure if this is the last book or if Bunce is just setting us up to do a big pivot and have these books follow a very different rhythm, because there's a big thing that happens that will, at the end, that is really going to affect Myrtle's life. So I'm interested to see how we're going from here. I still dearly love this series. I think it's such a fun historical middle grade murder mystery series. And I still love the dynamics between like Miss Judson and Myrtle. Maybe that's the other thing I didn't like. Miss Judson and Myrtle's vibe was a little bit off in this book, because Miss Judson is being forced to deal with so many other grown-up things, and so Myrtle is not her only responsibility in this book. So that could have contributed to it as well, because I feel like Miss Judson really kind of abandons Myrtle in this book for Myrtle to figure out the mystery on her own. So I don't know. I think if you're going to read this, definitely do the audiobook. And I'll be interested to see where this series goes from here. Also, I didn't like the mystery very much. I also read the third book in Sinister Summer series by Kirsten White. I read Camp Creepy. Oh, I loved this so much. 5 stars. 5 stars. It was so fun. The Sinister Winterbottom kids are dropped off at the summer camp, and in this summer camp, everyone is so excited to be there and so excited about everything, and like too excited, like too uncanny valley. Nobody should be that happy all the time. Nobody should be that excited about making lanyards, and so their spidey senses start tingling almost right away. And I just thought this one was so fun. I really like the mystery. We got a big reveal, because in this series we have each individual mystery in the books, but then there is an overarching mystery for the whole series about where their parents are and what the children are supposed to be finding at all these different places they've gone in each book. And we got a big reveal. No answers. Like, the reveal, it was one of those reveals where I have more questions, but now they're very specific questions because I know what direction we're going in now. So I'm very excited. Love this book. I already bought Menacing Manor, so I can't wait to dive into book 4 and see what more we learn about this mystery. But I absolutely love this middle grade series. I've read one of Kirsten White's YA before, and I really didn't care for it. And I haven't read any of her adult books yet, but I'm a big fan for middle grade. All right, and the last set of middle grade books that I made progress on is the Ryan Hart series by Renee Watson. I read Ways to Share Joy, which is book 3, and then Ways to Build Dreams, which is book 4. And this is a really lovely, slightly younger middle grade series about Ryan Hart, who lives in Portland, Oregon. And it's just a lovely, like, if you like Ramona Quimby or Ivy and Bean, where you're following one kid through her adventures with her family and her friends and just being a person. It's like very like slice of life, I think, is how you describe it. I liked Ways to Share Joy. I think I gave it like in the 4 range, but I gave Ways to Build Dreams a 5. This one was fantastic. And if you live in Portland or you live in the area, or if you're going to visit Portland and you have kids, like, it would be so easy and so fun to build a let's go to all the Ryan Hart places kind of day trip, because Renee Watson is really specific with her Portland landmarks and her Portland events, and even going into like surrounding areas. Like, they go to Lake Oswego in one book, which is a city close-ish to Portland, and then in this book they went to the Wooden Shoe Tulips farm, which is also in a city outside of Portland, but like so specific. And I just love this series, and I love Ryan, and watching her like navigate being a sister and being a friend and being a daughter and taking care of her people, and then also like living up to her name and these values that her parents have tried to instill in her. And it's a darling series, and I love it so much. Okay, I took a quick water break. organized my adult books. Now we're going to go into those. We're going to do liked but probably forgettable, liked and will stay with me, and loved. Those are categories. We're going to start with liked but forgettable. All right, I'm just going to go in order. First one is a nonfiction book I read. It's Living Resistance by Caitlin B. Curtis. I read this for Jess Owens' Community book club, and this is by an Indigenous author, and it's about I don't know. It's about resistance, but it's about resistance in like regular everyday stuff. So on the one hand, I wanted more actionable things to do, but that's really not the point of the book, because that can get into productivity culture, and Caitlin B. Curtis is really trying to lean away from that. So it's a little bit more gentle, a little bit more reflective, which is great. Kind of not who I am as a person yet. I mean, that sounds great down the road, but I'm not there on my own yet. There's also a lot more religion in this book than I would want. A lot more, and by a lot more religion, I mean a lot more mentions of Christianity and talk of God than I was looking for or really comfortable with. So unfortunately, it wasn't a huge win for me. I still did give it a 4 because I like the writing. I think the information can be really valuable, and I think the idea is really good. I just wasn't quite the right reader for this book, I think. But I'll be interested to hear what people think of it when Jess and Angela do their live show for this book. The Death I Gave Him by MX Lou. This is, I have a whole reading vlog for this one if you want a lot of thoughts, but this one is a sci-fi Hamlet retelling, and I loved the writing. I loved the format. This is a mix of text messages, emails, memoir excerpts, there's footnotes. I loved that structure. I loved the writing. I didn't love some very specific things that get into spoiler territory. The most I will say is that there is a robot or an AI in this, and a kind of like romantic type thing between a human and an AI, and I didn't like that. That kind of icked me out. And then there is like another thing in here that is a big time spoiler, so I'm not going to talk about that part. But it's just like a scene that felt super unnecessary, and I don't know why it's in there. I didn't love it. I am very interested in reading more from this author because this was their debut, so I'd be curious to see what they do next. I think if the AI and human romance, if that does not bother you, like, I would recommend this. I think this is a really solid Hamlet retelling. I really enjoyed it until we got to that scene. And then it went downhill. But maybe it won't bother you. Maybe you'll be like, that was a great time. I don't know what you're talking about. And I'll be like, great. I love that for you. I'm so happy. I just always think Murderbot would never, to be honest. I also read The Crane Husband by Kelly Barnhill. I read this because it was on the Nebula shortlist, and it was fine. It's pretty literary fiction with like a fantastical element, but it's got really heavy themes. It's not a feel-good book. The writing's beautiful, of course, because it's Kelly Barnhill, but I just don't know that this is going to stay with me very long. But this is about a 15-year-old girl who's unnamed, and her mother brings a new man into their home after her father has passed away. And it's about abuse and neglect, and it's just got, heavy things. And it's not a book that's going to make you feel better about life. So I know there are some of you who love books like that. So if you do, check this out. But if you're like me and you need a little glimmer of hope, then this is maybe not for you. The last book in this liked but forgettable stack is The Wicked Bargain by Gabe Cole Novoa. So disappointing that this is in this stack. This is a YA fantasy pirate book, and I don't even know. I wanted to love it. It was just fine. It didn't do anything offensive. It didn't hurt my feelings. I didn't, there was nothing that I can say, oh, this was bad, or oh, I didn't like this. It was just kind of meh, which is fine. I read this in my 5-star prediction reading vlog, so I'll link that down below if you want a lot of in-depth thoughts, because they're a little bit more consistent since I was updating it as I was reading. But overall, this is just meh. Okay, now we are on to the really liked list. I'm gonna start off with Ling Han, which I read as an ebook. This is also for reading the Nebula shortlist for the novella books, and this one was really cool. It is pegged as horror. I don't think it was horror. I think it was more gothic, magical realism maybe. But this takes place in a community called Home, where people can move into these houses where they are able to communicate with the ghosts of loved ones who have passed away. And we have 3 POVs for people who live in this community. We have a girl who has just moved in with her parents in order to see the ghost of her brother who passed away when he was 6 and she was like 4. So that POV is probably the hardest because of the way her mom especially has treated her since her brother has passed away, and she's now 16 or 17 I think at the start of the book. And then we have another POV who's a boy whose family has been at home for a while, but they don't have a house yet, so they are lurkers, which is people who are just, or lingerers, which one is it? Lingerers, I think, who just sit on the lawns of houses in the community and wait to be able to get a home themselves. And then the last POV is an elderly woman who has lived at home for decades. And it was really interesting. The structure was really cool. I thought the thought project was really fascinating, and I really liked the themes. I really liked the structure. It was very interesting. The narrative style was really cool. So I think if you have like 2 hours of your life, like, this was a very cool novella to check out. And then I wish I could remember where I heard about this, but this is Ruined by Sarah Vaughn, Sarah Winifred Searle, and Nikki Smith. And this is a historical romance graphic novel. And boy, oh boy, it was great. It was great. I had so much fun. I read this in, I think, one sitting. And the style is beautiful, and it's set in Regency England, and our main character, Catherine, ruins herself with a man who is unavailable, and so she's basically married off to this man named Andrew in order to save face. And Andrew's family their fortune has been lost by mismanagement, and he needs Catherine's dowry to restore his family's estate and their legacy. And so it's very much a marriage of convenience, and then they, of course, because it's a romance, they fall in love, and it was great. I loved it. It gave me all the swoons, made me very hopeful that maybe someday I can get back to reading historical romance without inadvertently cringing, because I hate that's where I've gotten as a reader. But this was really great. I think if you like a graphic novel, you like a historical romance, this one was also had a lot of really great representation. Like, there are people of color in this book, there are queer people in this book, and it was great. I did reread The Ruthless Lady's Guide to Wizardry by C.M. Wagner. This is a fantasy book about a fire witch who, in order to make a quick buck and get herself out of trouble, applies to be a bodyguard for this noblewoman who is on her way to get married. And then there is a murder, and she and a whole bunch of other women set about trying to solve the mystery of who did the murdering. And I previously had given this a 5-star. This time around I lowered it to 4.5 just because I felt like the beginning was a little bit slow, but then once we got past the murder, it was a good fun time. And it was so if you're looking for like a fantasy that's a little bit on the cozy side, not too much, because there are some high stakes and there is some like stuff. But if you're looking for like a silly, goofy time, like if you want like a necromantic mouse, if you want, or a skeletal mouse that's been necromancy back from the dead, there's a sapphic relationship, there's banter, there's the sweetest, I know they just said there's a sapphic relationship, but really the romance in here is the sweetest, most respectful, most bashful, most, oh my gosh, I like her so much, but I don't want her to think I'm an absolute fool and I don't know what to do with myself. Like those kind of vibes is a really good time. But I would definitely not go into this book taking it too seriously, because it does not take itself too seriously, which I love. I feel like I'm doing a lot of these gestures today, and I don't know why. I don't know what's up with that, but here we are. I also started the Inheritance series this month. I read The Inheritance Games by Jennifer Limbards, and this was so fun. I think this was maybe not a silly, goofy time, but it was a fun time. It's one of those books where if I look too closely at it, I start to see the flaws, so I just have to try to avoid that and just focus on the fun. But this is about a girl who, it's like Knives Out. She finds out she's inherited a fortune from a man she's never met, and of course his family is pissed, but in order to claim her inheritance, she has to live in the family estate for a year with, of course, the family. And this man, this millionaire who's died, left behind 4 grandsons who are all around her age. It was fun. It's really easy to read. The chapters are so short. Thank you so much. I need more people to do these super short chapters, because they are always a delight. And I had fun. I also handed this off to my middle kid, and they are about to start book 4, and they read these books in like 12 to 24 hours. So they are a super quick, easy read if you are a faster reader than I am. And then the last book in this particular category is Heart Haunt Havoc by Freydis Moon. I also read this for my 5-star predictions video, and this is a gothic romance horror novella. And it's about Colin, who is a exorcist and is hired to clean this house owned by Bishop. And since I said it was romance, I bet you can guess what happens between Colin and Bishop. And it was so fun. And it is one of those series where each book is a different couple. I'm really excited to read book 2 because I had a great time with this. And it was not too steamy, but definitely not faded black. All right, we're on to the last category, which is the absolutely loved, made a big impact, we'll be thinking about for a while books. Let's do the nonfiction first, because I think I have less to say about the nonfiction, even though I really, really liked it. But I read Doppelganger, A Trip into the Mirror World by Naomi Klein. And this, oh, do I know how to explain this? Naomi Klein is a writer who has an online doppelganger named Naomi Wolf, and they have very similar backgrounds. They're both writers, they're both Jewish women, they have written about very similar topics throughout their career, but Naomi Wolf really flipped over into COVID conspiracies, anti-vaccine, like that scene in 2020 and 2021. And so this starts off with Naomi Klein talking about parallels between her and Naomi Wolf and what it's like to have somebody that you were always confused with on the internet, and why she thinks those confusions happen. And then she really ties that doppelganger and that mirror imagery into a lot of other things in the world, like a lot about COVID. She talks about the trucker convoy, because there was a parallel convoy that happened 9 months prior. She talks about Palestine and Israel in this. So she connects it to a lot of real world, really serious events. I found it really interesting. I loved reading her insight. I would say this was a hard read for me only because she really goes back to 2020 and 2021 and talks about things that I haven't really unpacked since they happened. And she talks about world events and political events that, we all lived through them, and they were really hard. And I just haven't confronted those experiences. So I really had to go back and relive some things while reading this book, which made it hard to read, but I also found it really interesting and I just went at a slightly slower pace. And I also had the audiobook with it, which I think helped a lot because she has a very like podcasty voice, if that makes sense. Like, I mean that in the best way possible. It made her audiobook really easy to listen to. But the chapters are long, just FYI. But yeah, I think if you are like also fine with confronting that time period again, like if you feel like you're in the emotional space to handle that, then I would definitely recommend it. I gave it 5 stars. It goes without saying that every book in this little category is a 5-star, right? That's what that means. I also, what is this series called? I read book 2 in the Forever Desert series. Is that what it's called? Sure, we'll say that's what that's called. I read The Truth of the Aleke, and boy, this was also a hard read. So the Lies of the Ajongo came out last year, and that I gave 5 stars. It was like one of my favorite things I read last year. I am pissed that it is not nominated for a Nebula or a Hugo. I don't know what we're doing when one of the best books that came out last year isn't nominated for an SFF award. Like, what's going on? What are we doing? Anyways, it makes me mad. And this I gave 5 stars as well. But whereas I read The Lies of the Ajongo in one sitting, I had to break this one up because this one is heavier, weirdly enough. And this is short. This is only 100 pages, maybe a little bit over, but not by much. And so, yeah, it's 101 pages. So I don't want to give anything away, but this takes place years and years and years after the events of The Lies of the Ajongo. Long enough that the story of what happened in that book has had time to be bent and misshapen by people in power. And so we're following another city that has been manipulated and misinformed about their history in order to protect the people of power. I think it's, even if you don't normally read acknowledgements, I think reading the acknowledgements and hearing where the themes for this book came from was really helpful, because while I was in the middle and I was struggling a little bit, sometimes when I'm struggling with a book, I'll go and I'll read the acknowledgements, because sometimes the authors have stuff in there about their writing process, and that insight will be enough to help me push through. And in this case, it really did. While I was struggling, not because of the writing, but just because the content was heavier and I wasn't really sure what we were doing or where we were going, and reading that acknowledgement and the author talking about his inspiration really gave me the insight I needed to push through. And so I absolutely loved this. I think his writing is so good. I think these are perfectly paced, perfectly structured. No complaints. And I cannot wait for the last book in this series, because I think it's going to be a banger of a book. And the last book I'm going to talk about today, this is a book that has rewired my brain chemistry, thank you very much, is Bloom by Delilah S. Dawson. This is a novella. This is horror. This was also a sapphic romance. Oh my god, this book. So this book starts off like a cottagecore contemporary sapphic romance. It is so adorable. Ro, our main character, oh my god. Okay, this is a library copy, clearly. Look, I tabbed the you-know-what out of this book because I was fully expecting that I was going to be turning around and buying my own copy, and I wanted to know where the lines were that really resonated with me so that I could transfer them when I bought my copy. But this book goes so unhinged. In the last 50 pages, the yard work started. Okay, we're gonna wrap this up. This book goes so unhinged in the last 50 pages that I don't want it in my house anymore. But it was 5 stars. Like, incredible. The writing was so good. The way Delilah S. Dawson, like the way she would ratchet up the tension, oh god, it just stunning. It was stunning. The writing is gorgeous. I didn't feel good. I did not feel good after I finished this book. I felt nauseous after I finished this book. Also, I read this book on a Friday while my kids were at school, and I was not able to eat meat again until the following Wednesday. So, do with that what you will. But this was fantastic, even if I didn't feel good afterwards. So I want more people to read it so I have people to talk to about it, because right now I can only talk to my friends about it without using spoilers, and I need more people to read this so I can talk to them about it. Okay, we didn't quite beat the yard work, but I tried. So there we are. That's all 24 books that I read in March. Overall, I think it was a really good reading month. I had a lot of fun with a lot of these books, and the ones that I didn't have fun with, I would still read from those authors again, which isn't too bad. I have a feeling this is going to kind of be a longer one. So if you have made it to the end of this video, thank you so much for watching. If you liked this video and you want to see more, go ahead and give this video a like. Also subscribe to my channel. It is a really helpful, easy way to help my channel grow. And I would love to hear, have you read any of these? Thoughts? Have you read Bloom? If you've read Bloom, please talk to me about it in the comments, because I would love to also talk to people about that book, if that wasn't made totally apparent by the way I was talking about it earlier. If you want to leave an emoji to let me know you're here, let's do a cupcake emoji, and I will talk to y'all in the next one. Bye!